blue-eyed Egyptians. And there's that picture of Hor-Aha that's right there. And you can see his blue eyes that are in him. Threw a big fit on it whenever it came out, but you can see how pale and beautiful she is. This is Nefertiti, famous for her beauty and stuff, and she's missing her right eye, or would be her left eye, but this one is that blue color that's shown onto it too, and always has been. I mean, and of the first dynasties, how pale this woman is and this male. Caucasians, they both have blue eyes, and so did the Sumerians. Well, that's just a blurry-ass picture. So did the Sumerians and their statue. So did some of the founders of Peru and their gods, and they had beards put on. So was India, and the depictions of Buddha. And here's another famous one. It's there. Here's the guy we were talking about. So you can see they're all blue-eyed Egyptians. Here's a kind of a montage of them over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's a little over twice that much. And then there's pre-dynastic situations where they have blue inset eyes and lapis lazuli that came all the way from Afghanistan. And there's a bunch of red and blonde-haired mummies. And so looks like we rolled over, and now we're in part 3, people. So I guess starting it off with the finish of last time. And there's a good picture of her blue eyes that we're looking at. This is Nofret, and Rahotep is her husband. And yeah, we could look through a couple of pages and show more of that situation, but I'll do it more in the King Tut video, and I'll show you King Tut's relatives and so on also. It's coming up. But so back to the Hyksos, and hopefully this gets a full run out of it this time. The Hyksos are believed to have originated north of Palestine. They destroyed Amorite-ruled Byblos in the 18th century BC. Now, the Byblos they're talking about, because there's a few of them. No, you're going to do that to me again. Huh. No, we didn't want to go back to the picture. We wanted to go just... That's strange. Okay. Gonna go back to it. So they do mention that even Josephus tries to tell them exactly which one it is. That they kind of got it, right? So, Byblos. Pow. Byblos Nonoki is Jebele in county of Tripoli is Gilead, the largest city in Mount Lebanon, government of Lebanon. So, way up there. It's believed to have been the first occupied by 8800 to 7000 BC, continuously inhabited since 5000 BC, making it one of the oldest contributed sites in the Levant. They found a few that I've shown you since then, but in the 18th century BC, though, they destroyed the Amorite-ruled one, and then entered Egypt, bringing the Middle Kingdom to an end. The 17th century BC as to Hyksos' conquest. Some archaeologists depict the Hyksos as an invading horde of Asiatics, yet others refer to a creeping conquest, that is, a gradual infiltration of migrating nomads or semi-nomads who either slowly took over control of the country piecemeal or by a swift coup d'etat put themselves at the head of the existing government. And I say, yes, but it, yeah, okay, yeah, both are all D, all of the above, right? Manetho's account, as recorded by Josephus, describes the appearance of Hyksos in Egypt as an armed invasion by a horde of foreign barbarians wearing beards and so on, who met little resistance and who had subdued the country by military force. Of course, if they're barbarians, how could they subdue them so easy? And barbarians doesn't mean, like it would in D&D, be a guy that was scared of magic, and like Conan the Barbarian, his only way is to know to fight, and not to think things out usually, and so on. He's just gonna berserker run into the situation quite often. But then again, Conan's so built up he can do it, right? I mean, he's a good level 42 fighter, I think we used to put him set as. He records that the Hyksos burnt their cities, destroyed temples, and led women and children into slavery. It has been claimed that new revolutionary methods of warfare ensued the Hyksos, the ascendancy in their influx into the new emporia being established in Egypt's delta, and that at Thebes in support of the Red Sea trade. So it's basically they're saying, oh, the Egyptians didn't even really care that they moved in, and they were going to help them grow all the crops, and they were all hooked up on the Red Sea trade, so nobody cared. Like la-di-da, and then later on they cared a whole lot. Herbert Eustace Winlock describes new military hardware such as the composite bow, as well as the improved recurve bow, and most importantly the horse-drawn war chariot, as well improved arrowheads, various kinds of sword and daggers, new types of shields, mailed shirts, and the metal helmet. The chariot had all been introduced to the Middle East by the Indo-Aryans, or the Proto-Indo-Europeans, the Hyksos, and here in Indo-Aryans are going to show that it's really in. Are you going to do that to me? Tau, yeah. Indian people known as the Indian Aryan people, sometimes as Arya or Aryans, from the self-identity group of Indo-European peoples who brought the Indo-European languages, Indo-Iranian languages, a major branch of the Indo-European European language family, to major parts of Eurasia in the second wave. The second part, the Hyksos are also responsible for producing the horse and chariot, and they rode them in all their wars. Chariots had earlier played a key role in conquest by the Hittites, and the Hittites were Anatolian people who played an important role. Here they've got their pyramid type things built that are there from way back when, but they say that Hattusha was one centralized place, and it's where they get the name from. Around 1600 BC, reached its height during the mid 14th century BC, when they have Suppiluliuma the first, and there are later ones. People that study this always make fun whenever they say, no, not that Suppiluliuma. But in Anatolia, which is of course that little poking out knob that's there, and the Indo-Iranians, which they're going to show you is more towards India. Nope, same word. In northern India, so there's your mention. Let's just say this statement again. The Hyksos were also responsible for introducing the horse into Egypt. The chariot had been introduced in the Middle East by these Proto-Indo-European or Indo-Aryans. The Hyksos were also responsible for introducing the horse into Egypt and rode them into all their wars. Chariots had earlier played a key role in the conquest by the Hittites in Anatolia, the Indo-Iranians in North India, and the Mycenaeans in Greece. As the chariot became an important weapon of the nobles, the kings of that period, it became a symbol of power throughout Eurasia. You saw it in the deified statues, and in fact it's a chariot that's pulled by horses on fire that pull the sun across in Greek. And Apollo, we're talking about in Sol Invictus and all the stories that go along with it. And the son that had to use his dad's chariot and burned up. Horses, chariots, chariot of fire. Dun 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 dun. That came out whenever I was a kid. I went and see it just because it had that theme into it. Thought it was a great movie for the time, but uh, yeah. What was that guy's name? Vangelis? Dun 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 dun. Anyhow, I'm not going to try to. Ah. So, as the chariot became an important weapon of the nobles and kings of that period, it also became a symbol of power throughout Eurasia. Kings were portrayed on chariots, went to war in chariots, and were buried in chariots. In recent years, the idea of simply Hyksos migration, where little or no war has gained support, so like they just walked in and were uncontested. According to this theory, the Egyptian rulers of the 13th dynasty were preoccupied with domestic famine and plague, and that they were too weak to stop the new migrants from entering and settling Egypt. Even before the migration, Amenemhat III carried out extensive building works and mining, and here they're all still Caucasians. You look at his face right there, it looks, yes. Through which the Hyksos might have arrived in Egypt, overthrown native Egyptian rules. Supporters of the peaceful takeover of Egypt claim there's little evidence of the battles or wars in general of this period. They also maintain that the chariot didn't play any relevant role, and that wouldn't be true, i.e., no traces of chariots have been found at the Hyksos capital of Avaris. Well, they kind of took them with them, but the Egyptians were already mocking them and building them. You showed them how whenever you were friends and y'all left out of chariots, right? And, you know, the biblical story, there's millions, and then they go across a Red Sea that parts and everything. It's the Reed Sea they go across. And after they went through, that became a swamp, and they tried to take their chariots through, that became bogged down, and then a big swamp of water hit them. And that supposedly screwed them off, right? Which a lot of people want to relate to a tsunami that came from the event that was going on during that time, and maybe that was the whole signal that it had gone on too long. But that's going to change as they talk about it more and more. And you can just go to Hyksos and read this thing, but I'd like to add more into it to you, but hey, whatever. Supporters of the peaceful takeover of Egypt, there's no evidence of battles or wars in general in this period. They also maintain that the chariot didn't play any relevant role, right? And that chariots haven't been found at the Hyksos capital of Avaris, we talked about, despite extensive excavation. Janine Birao cites lack of Hyksos-style wares as evidence against a Hyksos invasion. Archaeologist Jaquetta Hawks stated that the Hyksos were migrating Semites rather than a conquering horde. John Van Seters, in his book The Hyksos, A New Investigation, which is quoted on here and used for citation, argues that the Ipuwer papyrus does not belong to the first intermediate period of Egyptian history of 2300 to 2200 as previously thought, but rather the second intermediate period, 1700 to 1600, and he sees a gradual settlement of the Hyksos from Phoenicia and Palestine. But what if that was in the first period, the Ipuwer papyrus, and in it indicates that, and it's in the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden, Netherlands, contains admission of Upaner, incomplete literary work, and then they go into its investigation. Hey, I may do a separate little video on that, and it won't be long as this. But what if it does date to the 2200 and says, well, that's 2200. Well, 2200 to 1500, you're way over 400 years that they've been around there. But is that the people that came in with the chariots? No, it's not. So that's not the right time. It doesn't fit, but it's not supposed to. It's just supposed to be enough of a hint to be like, well, who are those? Oh, aha. Well, who did they end up being? Oh, aha. Where did they come from? Oh, aha. Well, who did those people all mess with? Oh, aha. But that's something that a lot of people know, and this is just verifiers of a lot of that. But it goes back to before that time too. For in the Ice Age, everything was pushed down a whole lot more, and people were in more contact than people would like to believe. I mean, Ireland and that area, UK was all under 2 kilometers of ice. Um, the ethnicity. The Hyksos were probably an ethnical mix of largely Semitic origin. They are believed to have originated from north of Palestine. Well, since Palestine is just out the delta right there, then they'd be north of that, and they'd go, yeah, well, anywhere's north of that unless you're straying straight east. The Hurrians also came to Canaan from this area, so now we're talking about these Hurrians are Proto-Indo-European people that we had talked about, come out of the Black Sea region and Caucasus Mountains. Ta-da. And so they were possibly related to the Amorites, and Amorites, they're going to show, were an ancient Semitic speaking people from Syria who also occupied large parts of southern Mesopotamia from 2100 BC to the end of the 17th century BC. And they talk about the Elamites being out there on past that too. They also may have included Habiru. Doesn't that name sound familiar? The Habiru. A warlike group of largely Semitic people. Kamose, the last king of Theban 17th dynasty, refers to Apepi as a chieftain of Retinu. Retinu is an ancient Egyptian name for Canaan and Syria area. Covered a region from the Negev desert to the Orontes River. Anyhow, it's all the way up into Asia Minor. In a stele that implies a Canaanite background for the Hyksos king, and this is the strongest evidence for a Canaanite background for the Hyksos, but Canaanites from Proto-Indo-Europeans. Mixing and coming in and just going past them and overpowering, stepping on into Egypt. And as they did, the people in the front of it and around the delta took over the delta. They had already been in it. But they talked about the rulers perhaps being of these Aryan race, didn't they? But if they're the same people, it doesn't matter that much. Then again, there was that sons of God, daughters of man situation that happened whenever they came down. So, it happened near a mountain. It's up near there. And okay, so now we're looking at the Hyksos and names like Kamose of the last Theban dynasty, but Khayan's name is generally interpreted as Amorite Hayanu, Hayan, on, which the Egyptian form represents perfectly, and this in all likelihood is the correct interpretation. Kim Rideoff furthermore observes that the name Hayanu is recorded in the Assyrian kings list for a remote ancestor of Shamshi Adad of 1813 BC of Assyria, which suggests that it had been used for centuries prior to Khayan's own reign. So having an elder name, and that's going to come up a couple of more times in this. Where are we at? Coming up on 20 minutes on part 3. If it goes to a part 4, it's in your top left hand corner. Although before I go into it, I'm going to go and upload these 3, because it'll probably, if I'm forced to do it before I kick it naturally at 40 minutes, it's going to be because it ran out of time. And so there will be one part 4 in your top left hand corner, and because I'll finish recording the whole thing. Although, man, I don't think people are going to be able to watch all this at one time. Maybe I should put it out in a pulse of 1, 2 at a time, 2 one night, 2 the next night, do it on a weekend. Anyhow, so it's in a Sumerian kings list, Assyria, which suggested it had been used for centuries before. The issue of Sakir Har's name which has to do with horror. It's one of the three earliest of the 15th dynasty kings, also leans towards a West Semitic or Canaanite origin for the Hyksos rulers. So that name seems to be with Sakir thrown onto the, if not the Hyksos people themselves. So he's like, okay, so it's either the regular West Semitic Canaanite people or the Hyksos themselves with that first name. Contemporary, that's what he says. Later he'll say something different. Contemporary with the Hyksos, there were widespread Indo-Aryan expansion. Let's take a look at that. And, well, the Indo-Aryans were the ones that helped out India, and we can see that. But the expansion that happened, if we look at it here, they talk about the Yamnaya culture and it being around the Black Sea region and top of the Caucasus Mountains and spreading through and around and up and over and across to the right and down over, and they don't mention India. Oh wait, they got a little dot, and then all of a sudden, pavoom, they're all over India. But they never show the dip down that goes into, why they leave that out? Political reasons. The arrival of the Hyksos in Egypt, along with the arrival of the Hurrians in Syria and the Kassites in Babylonia, or Samaria, but it's not even Samaria anymore by then, has been connected with this migration. The Hyksos used the same horse-drawn chariot as the Indo-Aryans, and Egyptian sources mention a rapid conquest. While the majority of the Hyksos are thought to have been Semitic, the Hyksos are usually believed to have been contained Indo-Europeans or Aryans and Hurrians, which were also Proto-Indo-Europeans among the leadership. According to William L. Oschenwald, it's certainly that the Hyksos contained Hurrians, who were the Indo-Aryan rule and influence. Claude Frederick Scheffer states that the Hyksos were related to the Hurrians and the Mitanni, and I showed you a Mitanni coin here earlier, but there's the Mitanni range when it exploded was all the way there, and then there was the Hattusians when they were smaller than that. I've shown you in a video Hattusians though, and not much Mitanni stuff, but there isn't. But then again, in that same area, wait, there's Göbekli Tepe and stuff coming out just right north of there, popping up like crazy. And some interesting stuff in a few places. Claude Frederick Scheffer Oschenwald states that the Hyksos were related to the Hurrians and the Mitanni, while the names of the earliest lesser Hyksos rulers are Semitic names of greater or names of later or greater Hyksos rulers have been identified as having Indo-Aryan, Hurrian, and other certain etymologies. So they're saying, well, the first couple might have been from the ones that were already there, but all the other ones there, and one of them is mentioned, especially in 70 Egyptian 7's videos on this, that she puts in. She shows in a little clip that one of these is Yaqub Hor, and then Yaqub Baal, right? And there's this Baal worship that's going on to these people and to the area, and the ancient people that were there, and the Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and all of that, and that Yaqub is Jacob, and there it is with those people. But that's supposed to have happened 600 to 700 years earlier, and it's actually just trying to put dates on somebody's name, and might have been famous enough to pull off and find sometime, and well, what cities really did he have to do with? Did they come down through Jordan and do all those things, and some of which are attributed to the Assyrians and so on? Well, we'll get into that in other videos, I guess, because I don't want to go too far off into this, or off in left field. I've done it too much already. We're at 25 minutes on part 3. Again, if it goes to flip, they'll be up in your top left-hand corner. So he says that they have Indo-Aryan, Hurrian are uncertain etymologies. These names are associated with the second wave of Hyksos invasion in the 17th century BC, which was composed of a mixed group of well-organized warriors that were different from the earlier Asiatic Hyksos princes that arrived in Egypt in the 18th century BC. So they were groups of warriors led by princes, 7 of them, was composed of a mixed group of well-organized warriors that were different than the earlier Asiatic Hyksos princes. In the 18th century BC, John Bight cites that as an evidence that there might have been an Indo-Aryan element among the Hyksos. So another person confirms it. Phil Curry Hittite wrote that the Hyksos were a mixed group with addition of Semites, including Hurrians, Hittites, Mitanni, and Habaru. Rebels, outlaws, raiders, mercenary, bowmen, servants, slaves, and laborers. Because that's got to do with the Hibernia and the Iberian Peninsula, which it shows in ancient maps up in this area that's pretty much where the Mitanni are, and it also shows that they're out near Spain. In fact, the name is still known of Iberia. Hittite connected the arrival of the Hyksos with the Indo-European migrations. Is that going to show that same thing? No, but it's where it all came from. And the connections of that from linguistics people goes all the way from Sanskrit to the Irish, all the way up to China and into Russia, all across and in between. We're speaking a derivative that came eventually out of it. Hittite connected the migrations at the time, the cities, and introduction of the horse and chariot by them into Egypt as evidence of their Indo-European connections. Any regards the Indo-Europeans were few in number and rapidly became assimilated into the Semitic majority, which explains why only small traces of their separate linguistic identity survived. So that could be a possibility, but I think we can tell by that linguistic spread that's going on, contrast to what was just said then, these people are pretty good at linguistics and getting into different languages. And I'll be damned if Caucasians don't speak Italian and French, English that we're speaking now, but Welsh being radically different, Scandinavian, Denmark, Danish, all through Poland, Russian, man, all the Indo-Aryan languages, they're pretty good about speaking other people's languages. That's the reason people that were helped by them kept their basics of their linguistics quite a bit, but they ended up with a lot of similar loanwords. One way to prove that it happened. Since the early 20th century, the possibility of Hurrian, in particular Proto-Indo-European influences among the Hyksos, has been hotly contested by certain scholars due to political reasons. The rejection gained currency after World War II, I wonder why, as a reaction against Nazi anti-Semitism and racial theories. Oh, that's because the Nazis said that they were the Aryans, and that these people that were claiming that they weren't the real people in the first place that come from it, and so they had faked something in the whole play out of it all. When you come to find out where the 12 tribes are, they had reason to be able to speak up. Scholars rejecting Hurrian and Indo-European influences among the Hyksos typically pointed out that the majority of Hyksos names were Semitic, that there is a lack of archaeological evidence suggesting a large-scale invasion of Egypt from Syria during the arrival of the Hyksos, and chronologies which place a rise of the Hurrians before the emergence of the Hyksos. I don't know how you can come up with that if they came in with a load of these chariots, horses, and all their weapons and stuff. You'd have to say, well, I think this is it. Well, what if they invaded somebody else, then handed them the weapons, then made them go fight instead? Is that what you're going to go with? And did anybody rule those people and come down with them? And who the hell would come up with a bunch of badass tanks and go, okay, y'all all take our tanks? And I don't think so. Probably they didn't have a full amount as it was. And they weren't all chariots. Some were carts. Some were yurts. Proponents of this theory include John Van Cedars and J.R. Cupper. Let's see. Did I leave that one part out? Yeah, no, I didn't. Which placed the rise of the Hurrians before the emergence of the Hyksos, saying, well, it could have just been the Hurrians and Hattusians, and that's where that happened to. Then they blended back into the whole area and kind of became somebody different. Proponents of this theory include John Van Cedars and J.R. Cupper. Martin Bernal states that although he admires the political motives that deny Hurrian and Indo-European influences among those Hyksos, the evidence indicate that they are wrong. Ding! Where are we at here? 31. Going to continue. So now we can see the more different way that this Hyksos was written than either two of the one from before. But 50th dynasty, going to go through it. Traditionally, only the 15th dynasty rulers are called Hyksos. The Greek name Hyksos was coined by Manetho to identify the 15th dynasty Asiatic rulers of northern Egypt. In Egyptian, Hyksos means rulers of foreign countries, but Josephus mistranslated apparently Hyksos as shepherd kings, or what if it meant the same. By around 1700 BC, Egypt was fragmented politically with local kingdoms springing up in the northeast delta area. One of these was that of King Nasi, whose capital was at Avaris. We talked about that as being, that's Raiders of the Lost Ark when it refines it. And he ruled over a population consisting largely of Syrio-Canaanites who had settled in the area during the 12th dynasty, and so they had already been there for a long time, and who were probably mainly soldiers, sailors, shipbuilders, and workmen. His dynasty was probably replaced by a West Semitic-speaking Syrio-Canaanite dynasty that formed the basis of the later Hyksos kingdom, able to spread southwards because of the unstable political situation, while aided by an army of ships and foreign connections. And so when we look at that and the dating on that, that might lead to a push that happened because of the supposed Trojan War and situation that went on that would have been in that upper area there and would have maybe changed the demographic there after the situation. Yeah, it seems so. The earlier 14th dynasty Egypt had been West Asian and Semitic speaking. However, its pharaohs did not style themselves Hyksos. They didn't call themselves that. And they seem to have been vassals of the 13th dynasty who oversaw a community of Asiatic merchants and shepherds who had been granted land in the Nile Delta. So like viceroys running over the people that were already there and separated to be against them too, and then all of them got kicked out. Is that what this guy's going with? Let's continue. These Hyksos, by contrast, were largely Amoritic invaders who, capitalizing on a weak moment in Egypt's history, managed to conquer the entire country briefly as far south as Thebes under Khan at the first part of it, or the first that they're mentioning of it politically. But the Hyksos had Canaanite names as seen in those with names with ancient Semitic religions such as Enot and Baal, and several other pharaohs did in fact adopt the Egyptian title Hekukashut, foreign overlords, for themselves. So now all of a sudden it becomes foreign overlords instead of rulers. Overlords. I can see a twist here. For themselves, along with the Egyptian throne names, they introduced new tools, warfare into Egypt, most notably the composite bow and the horse-drawn chariot. The names, the order, and even the total number of the 15th dynasty rulers are not known in full certainty. They have thought there had been 6. Some people claim there's a couple more. They can only find like 4 or 5, and 5 is only this one they find this one instance of. It'll talk about it later. The names appear in hieroglyphs, on monuments, small objects such as jar lids and scarabs. In those instances when the prenomen and nomen do not occur together in the same object, there is no certainty that the names belong together as the two names of a single person. The Danish Egyptologist Kim Ryle sums up the complex situation in his 1997 study of the Second Intermediate Period by stating that there is only vague indications of the origin of the 15th dynasty, and concurring that the small number of surviving names of the 15th dynasty are too few to allow for general conclusions about the Hyksos background. Furthermore, Ryle stresses that we lack positive indications that any of the rulers of the 15th dynasty were related by blood, and accordingly could be dealing with dynasty of mixed ethnic origin. So in other words, we have no indication that, like the Egyptians, how they ran it to father to son, that necessarily was true with them, although it does look like it with that Yukub Hor and the Yukub Baal situation. But they say, well, that could just be the same one, and he ruled for a little bit longer, and he's both of them. And so not all of them are put in right. In numbers here that they have it with a Pepe and Kamudi at the end are just questioned on whether that's even their dates, because it's pretty much written off. Damnatio is a expression used to wipe somebody's memory out of existence. And boy, somebody damnation horide all the Caucasian people here through the time of Christ in the Middle Ages, and it's taken us 2,000 years to come out of that fog that we've been under. You can all breathe a breath of fresh air. And I think I'm going to end this one right here and then go to the next one. And I tell you that we're about halfway through now. And I'm sorry this is going to be so much, but only half this problem is me that won't shut up. The other half of it is where they have extensive information on the Hyksos now. Here's Yaqub Har right here. Meru Sera Yaqub Har, Pharaoh of Egypt, 17th or 16th century BC, ranged during the fragmented Second Intermediate Period. Yep. Anyhow, I hope 7 Phoenician 7 re-uploads that video. She's got all of her old videos saved, and she's been uploading them under the Egyptologist 7, her new channel, which y'all got to check out if you haven't seen it yet. She's pretty much centered around the genetics that goes around there, and the genetics of, say, the Levant through Egypt and all of Africa, and the truth and reality versus debunk lies, if you will. And she's real good at it. Real good at it. And has a connection that I've really liked, because I was stuck with a group of people talking about particle shards and whether people were related, and that we probably would never be able to get DNA out of them. Now they figured out how to do it, and they've gotten quite a few DNA samples and realized that it's not just pottery, but those people did move. Well, they're still there too. Yeah, they're still there too. There were a lot of them. There are a lot of them. Here they come again. So, in your top left-hand corner, we'll go on to part 4. And I don't know if I'm going to release these all at once, guys. So we might go 1, 2, and then 3, 4. But it looks like we're going to be 5, 6. So maybe I'll do 3 and then 3, and hope you'll come back and watch the whole thing. I know I'm going off in left field quite a bit. I don't think I could have said this straight without giving a lot of information. Top left-hand corner. We'll see y'all there. Peace.